The vehicle turns onto its side. She clambers out, and the beach ball size object is just hovering above her. It's like waiting for it to get out of the vehicle. She gets out. She then picks up her weapon, discharges several rounds at it, which then makes the UFO or the object go away at speed.
Chris Lehto, welcome to Lehto Files. That was Gary Hesseltine. In February 2023, he released Non-Human, the Rendlesham Forest Incidents, 42 Years of Denial, following a 5-year reinvestigation of the famous Rendlesham Forest incident that took place in late December 1980 in Suffolk, England. So the book is now released and available on Amazon. Very excited today to have Gary on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Chris, for inviting me on.
Excellent. How was it writing a book like this?
Well, even though I do my own PDF UFO Truth magazine, which I've now done since retirement from the police for 10 years, it's totally a different medium writing a book. And of course, the Rendlesham Forest case is no simple case to tell. I'd been involved in Rendlesham research since December of 2007, when I was invited by the UFO Hunters TV program to get involved in one of their episodes on the case, and that's where I met Colonel Charles Halt for the first time. So I've been doing Rendlesham research for a long time. I thought I knew the case well as most people, but 5-6 years ago I decided to do a deep dive reinvestigation as part of a documentary, hopefully going to come out by the end of the year, called Capel Green. I'd been asked to be the lead researcher, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I best be accurate. So I thought, well, I'll go back to day one after the incident and then see what I could find. And amazingly, I found lots of old UFO publications, PDFs, little magazines, and found some very early interviews that I think are very relevant to the case. I then re-interviewed a lot of military witnesses, and with a couple of them I was able to use an enhanced technique to try to retrieve more memories, and that worked, seemingly worked. It's not designed to be used many decades later, but the premise was that if you had experienced something really profound, that those memories are actually still there. It's a question of whether you can trigger through memory tools, release that information. And I was able to get that a couple of times.
Wow.
It worked well on a couple of occasions, unexpectedly, but it worked well. Because the things are so seared into the memory, it's just a question of, can you trigger a release mechanism? And it worked a couple of times, and they're key interviews that are in the book. The Rendlesham Forest case, for me, is the most complicated UFO case. And there are thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases from around the world. But rarely do you have a series of multiple events. And this is what Rendlesham's all about. Rarely do you have literally hundreds of moving parts, literally hundreds of military personnel on various shifts, all playing a part, and there's still a lot of information that I'm convinced is still there to be retrieved all these decades later. There is also a lot of politics involved in the Rendlesham case, because I think it was such a good case that the American government stroke military, US Air Force, the British government stroke Ministry of Defence did their damnedest to quell any interest in the case, to actually put out disinformation, to actually dumb it down. And I believe that the media in the UK were complicit in allowing that to happen, especially when we talk about the lighthouse being an explanation for all the different incidents, which was always ludicrous from the start. And my reinvestigation proves that it was purely a media invention. There was no substance to it. It was denied by all the personnel at the start, including Colonel Holt, or Lieutenant Colonel Holt at the time. It was never that, but it was pushed by the media. And I think that it was done to downplay the significance of the number of events that had taken place over several days. So I think that's why it's so complicated. And it was actually my then wife, second wife, who suggested, why don't you write a book, because you've got that much material. And I realized that lots of the material would never get into a documentary, just to time constraints. So I thought, okay, I'll do it, and not realizing that it would take me 3 years to write.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, one of the hardest things was deciding on its format, and that took me about 6 months to work out the best way to get my head around telling the complex information. And I think in the end, I resorted back to like a cold case review, looking it through evidentially as a former detective, and literally taking personality out of it. I know a lot of the people involved, met them, several of them. So I took that all out and I just concentrated on what was the facts, interviews, transcriptions of TV appearances, radio appearances, old documents, transcribed them all, and revealed a hell of a lot of new information that I wasn't aware of, which is all added to the book with the very flattering reviews I've had from researchers around the world. I think I must have done something right. So fingers crossed that people will keep saying that.
So first is, why is it called non-human?
Because in the end, in the one of the concluding chapters is after that 3 years of writing and 5 years of research, I concluded that there were 18, if you actually look at the back of the book in that chapter, there's 18 incidents listed. Subsequently, following the release of the book, one of those, it was actually a wrong date, so that's come out. So we're looking at 17 different timed events. Now, most people, and I think in America, are under the illusion that it's just a couple of nights, a couple of sightings. It's not. And when I broke it down like a detective should do, different timed events where there were time gaps, and the reason that the mentality of doing it this way is like, if I see you run out of a house, you're a burglar running out of a house, and I'm the police officer chasing you, and I'm seeing you from a distance, I see a figure running out the house, I'm giving chase, I'm on the radio, blah. If I lose you for an hour in a housing estate, and then I see somebody else running, can I be certain that that is the same person I saw? And the answer is no. And there's a break in the time. There's a timed gap. So when you see somebody who's another suspect or a potential suspect, that then becomes another sighting event, which you then track until you either lose it again or somebody's in custody. So that's the principle. And in the conclusion of the book, I now highlight 17 different timed events. The first one beginning actually on the 23rd of December, which nobody had ever heard about, but comes out in the book. And the last one probably on the night of the 28th, 29th. So we're looking at a 5-6 day period. And prior to that, we were looking at a consecutive 3-night period. So there's a lot of new information in there, which we can talk about as and when and if you bring that up.
I'm sure you've explained this to many people. What do you say to them who have never heard of Rendlesham Forest, or people that haven't looked into it?
Rendlesham Forest is arguably the best UFO case in history. And what I mean by that is that there are so many witnesses, the majority of which were US Air Force security police officers, but there are others. There were civilians in and around the base that saw things, that lived nearby. There were also different trades, people that saw things as well. So if you think about it, it's a twin base complex, RAF Woodbridge, RAF Bentwaters, that are maybe separated by 3 miles of forest, and in the middle, in simplified terms, in the middle is Rendlesham Forest. So you've basically got 2 US bases leased from the Royal Air Force. One of them at RAF Bentwaters housed nuclear weapons. In the book, I highlight documents that prove that there were nuclear weapons there. But one of the other things that's, I think, key to the whole story is why UFOs turn up. Now, we're led to believe that UFOs only turn up in late December, but it's not true. There were significant, what I would call precursor cases, 3 throughout 1980 in the build-up in February, July and November to the late December events. But one of the cases that was originally, and the image that's on your screen now, relates to an incident that happened on the 26th of December. It turns out 1979, a full year, but at the same time. So that we can talk about that later on. It's an exceptional case. A new military witness who was not a security police officer. He was a crew chief. He repaired aircraft, and he was working on aircraft within it when he had an extraordinary event. But turns out in December 1979, a full year before the late cluster. All of these things are, I think, relevant to the story.
This is a full year before 1989 December, right? This is December 1979.
Yeah, this involves an airman, a crew chief called James Stewart. And originally, like I say, he just assumed that his event, when he found about the Rendlesham events, had occurred at the same time because it was the same time frame. But actually, after the release of the book, he checked his service records and said, no, I actually left in February of 1980. So hence why instead of 18 separate timed incidents, it's now 17, because this turns out to be a precursor case. But his story, nobody had ever heard of this. I've checked his military background, his credentials, talked to him on video, Skype, etc. He is working by the east gate of RAF Woodbridge. And if you look in the map there, you'll see the runway. This is RAF Woodbridge. And there's the blue to the left there. You'll see one where it says UFO, which is off the base. But to the right, you can see where he was working, which is called the trim pad. So he is working next to a hardened aircraft shelter, as we would say in RAF, where you've got an aircraft inside. And he was working in the middle of the night on what he says is now December the 26th, 1979. And he was working outside, middle of the night, on his own, repairing one of the last three Phantoms, F-4 Phantom jets, fighter jets, that were on the base. They all had to be going because A-10s had come in en masse, and there was still a few that left. So this is December 79, and he's working underneath it, middle of the night. There is the little step ladder going up to the cockpit. It had recently had a new cockpit fitted screen, and that becomes relevant. So he's working underneath, and then he feels a shudder, as if something has just jumped or standing or collided with the tail of the aircraft. So he comes out and doesn't see anything. And as he is at the bottom, he then, underneath the aircraft, he hears what is like a scratching on glass or whatever the canopy is, like akin to a claw mark sound. And he's thinking, what the hell is that? He climbs up the little ladder to the cockpit and finds 3 scratches in the front cockpit of the aircraft, and it was new, so he knew that was new damage. He then feels a second vibration, as if something has jumped from the tail of the aircraft down to the ground. There's a little judder, a vibration. And he looks down the spine of the aircraft, and he sees in the moisture and the dew of the night some footprints of a kind. Doesn't recognize them, but just some kind of footprint. He doesn't see an object, but he sees, within seconds of that, he sees something scurrying through undergrowth towards the perimeter fence. And it's like there's always forest near to where the squadrons are and to the perimeter. So, and you can see on that photograph that it was very close to the perimeter fence and close to what was called the East Gate. And so he sees something, he doesn't see what it is, but something is scurrying through the bushes. At the same time, he then hears 2 shots, 2 discharges of firearm, and this is a question in itself. He knew that there was a US Air Force security police officer by the East Gate. Now that's interesting because it's not routinely manned, but it clearly was in December 1979. And he said he hit the deck, as you would. He then hears a shout of get away, get away. 2 more shots are fired from the direction of the East Gate. And then as he gets up after that, he is looking towards a clump of trees, which you look at now where it says UFO. So if you go left to that second one, so this is off the base, approximately 150 meters from the East Gate, so extremely close to the location. And there is a UFO descending vertically down into a small clump of trees. Now, what you've got to look at on this map is these are new trees. This is not how it was in 1980. In 1987, 90% of the trees at Rendlesham Forest were destroyed in what was described as a hurricane. It was a freak storm and 90% of the trees went. So this is not a fair representation. But geographically,
when was that? When did that happen?
1987, 7 years after the event,
okay.
8 years after the event. So at the time, there was a clump of trees nearby.
More like this, maybe? Or
yes, that kind of thing. And he said he would see a tree, a UFO descending vertically. And he said that the object that was scurrying through away from his location, where the aircraft was, he said 1 minute it's going towards the perimeter and bushes, and then it's on the other side of the bushes. Doesn't know how. And he says that scurrying object, whatever it was moving towards the landing UFO at the same time. And the second one from the east gate, so if you see the long line, which is a blast wall, the dark line, that's the blast wall. The east gate then in 1980 was beside the front of that, so literally where you just were. And then that's the little road. And then so literally something is scurrying through the bushes towards the landing UFO. So you've got two objects not seen moving through bushes towards this landing UFO. Because of the shots fired, his crew supervisor, who was in a vehicle, then turns up and says, "Get in." He's pleased to see him. He says, "We thought you'd been abducted. You were the fourth or fifth or something like that." It conjures up this incredible scenario that something significant was happening in December 79. Now, nobody had ever heard of this incident, but I have no reason why this military personnel guy, James Stewart, is going to make this up. He's just a natural. He's a normal family man. I've checked his service records. I've had video discussions with him. He's a really stand-up guy. I have no reason to disbelieve him. Why is he going to enter himself into this story? And he could have just stayed quiet and thought, well, I'll stay in the book and whatever, if he was lying. But he isn't. He straight away come to me and said, no, I've checked my service records. So it has to come out from December. But this incident in itself, there's no reason for this guy to make it up. And it's a sensational account of another incident prior to. Now, a lot of people in December, some of the witnesses, security police witnesses in 1980, believed that it's almost as if they were waiting for UFOs to come back. And now when you look at this December case from a year earlier, maybe that gives that more credence. Larry Warren, who was the original military whistleblower, had always said that by the time he got involved in his event, he said it was like they were expecting something to arrive because there were movie cameras there. So again, we talk about lost evidence, and just before we came on air, I mentioned about evidence and missing evidence, which we'll come back to. Two witnesses now confirm and corroborate each other. Larry Warren, it was a controversial standalone account for a long time, who'd said that there'd been what was apparently another landing, that they'd in a field, that there'd been a security police cordon around it, perhaps 10 or 15 other security police officers, of which he was a part, that it was being filmed on two cameras, an early video camera, which did exist, and cinefilm, that senior military personnel turn up, senior officers, including the base commander, Colonel Williams, responsible for 12,000 personnel, all of which was denied by Colonel Williams. Colonel Holt is also believed to be there, denied it all the time. However, through the book Reinvestigation, I finally got a hold of a key witness called Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, and he absolutely corroborates Larry Warren's account. It was a 4.5 hour transatlantic phone call. It's one of these where I tried to use this enhanced cognitive method of interviewing. I was an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses in the police, and he really got into the zone, and I just let him flow. And he corroborates this incident, and he said, yeah, movie cameras there, motion picture footage. So there's every reason to think that that footage existed, probably still exists somewhere buried deep in the Indiana Jones kind of lockup somewhere, this vast lockup where all the best evidence goes. It may well still exist, but certainly I have reason to think that that film did, that incident took place, because he says that Colonel Williams was there. He says that Colonel Halt was there. And so they're corroborating each other almost hand in glove.
What incident is that? You mean the actual?
This is a second landing in a farmer's field. So this is not the one that everybody is familiar with. If we look at prior to the book, there are basically, the consensus was that there'd been 3 nights of continuous UFO activity. Okay. With the result of the reinvestigation in my book, I'm now looking at 4 consecutive nights, an extra night added. And on the 2nd of Sergeant Adrian Bustinza's nights of involvement was this second landing, this controversial landing, which had all been denied. The simple story for the Americans is, or anybody just listening, is that this is not one sighting. This is multiple UFO events over what is many days. We're never going to know for certain now, 42 years down the line. We're never going to be able to pin people's memories down absolutely perfect now. But what we can do is retrieve most of the incidental information. You know, dates and times may be a bit hazy, but what you saw, what you personally were involved in, they will be ingrained into your memory. So that's what I've tried to do. And obviously you try to work with dates as best you can, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to pin everything down now. Now, if you want to talk about that missing piece of evidence, we're saying that the video that we know that was taken, is some interesting things that came from the book. That video of this second incident was taken to a waiting fighter jet that landed at RAF Bentwaters. The guy who drove the base commander was a guy called Captain Mike Verano, and he drove the base commander, or the person in charge of the twin bases, Colonel Williams, to this fighter aircraft, and he was carrying a top secret satchel, and he said, "What's in the satchel?" And he says, "It's film of the UFO." And he's gone public with that, Captain Mike Verano, in a couple of instances early on, not for a long time. If you're still alive, if you're watching this, Captain Mike Verano, please contact me, and I'd love to chat. There are lots of other witnesses that I'd like to get hold of as well. But suffice to say that that was put onto a waiting jet. The jet flew, believed to go to Ramstein in Germany, and then from there, we believe that the film ended up in Washington.
Well, I watched cameras go through the actions of filming, and I know still pictures were taken. And off the fabric of this machine thing came this bluish gold bubble that was about a foot off the ground, and it split into 3. And inside that, the upper extremities of what I only can say was a non-human entity. And it was given to the F-15 that flew from Germany onto Bentwaters Airfield, and it was handed to the pilot, canopy closed, and the plane took off.
And the reason why we think it ended up in Washington is that a lady called Ann Turner was an FOI, Freedom of Information person at the Pentagon. And a US researcher called Ray Boucher had been in heavy contact with her, trying to track down this film and whatever. And she eventually confided in him that she'd heard pilots talking about the film of Rendlesham Forest. And yet she said, when I looked in my records at the Pentagon, there was nothing. But she'd heard pilots privately talking amongst themselves. So again, bit of circumstantial evidence to say that that film really did exist. The thing that you're pulling up now is, again, something revealed in the book for the first time, is that at least 3 airmen who were involved, military witnesses, have come forward and said that routinely 3 of the 4 radio channels that were used by the security police and law enforcement were routinely recorded on audio. Now, this kind of has the echoes of me when I joined the police in 1983, because one of the things that I had to do early on in my service, if occasionally you were put in the control room, was to change audio tapes So just 3 years later, and we was generally behind the US technology-wise, we were kind of doing the same thing. So when, so I can identify with that. Now, one of the people who corroborated the fact that these tapes were routinely recorded was Sergeant Adrian Bustins, who'd been involved in this controversial second landing with this video filmed event. Now, he said that he was, many years afterwards, sent an envelope, an anonymous source, that sent him 3 of the 4 audio cassette tapes for 3 of the 4 audio channels for one of the nights he was involved. Now, that then proves that these were routinely recorded, and for a long time he had that evidence in a little like satchel or suitcase. But eventually, because he was getting family pressure, it affected his life greatly. His father worked for the government. He was getting a lot of grief from his family because he was still interested in this. In a fit of pique, he set fire to it in the back garden in a fire pit and destroyed it. But that doesn't negate the fact what he was telling me, which he said on Skype, was that he had received this confirmation and physically 3 of the 4 audio tapes. Nobody, in terms of Colonel Halt, in terms of Gordon Williams, the base commander of the twin bases, they have never admitted to any of this. Unfortunately, Gordon Williams passed away 4 or 5 years ago now. Obviously, Colonel Halt is still alive, but to date, he has denied any such admission of audio recordings. But 3 people have confirmed that. So there's no reason why these people are going to lie. So there clearly was a lot more evidence. And you think about all the confusion with regards to the Rendlesham incident and all the intrigue and the infighting that's occurred over many, many years, how relevant that would be to have access to those audio tapes and listen to them. And that would certainly give us a lot more information. And I think the reason why you're never going to get those is because we already suspect that there are more incidents that took place, but we don't have all the people coming forward. I mean, just as an aside, there are a couple of people who were involved in what was called the Halt Night. Colonel Halt is famous for writing a memorandum that was sent to the Ministry of Defence by Squadron Leader Morland, the RAF liaison officer, which was just a 1-page document, and he wrote it a couple of weeks after the incident, and it's become one of the most famous UFO documents in history because he, at the time, was a lieutenant colonel, and he admitted in that document that he'd seen multiple UFOs himself, which was very rare for somebody of his rank to ever put their name to an official document. It was on US Air Force headed notepaper. That didn't surface until around April of 1983. For a long time, the US Air Force steadfastly said, we have no documentation and nothing. Yeah, we believe there was an incident, but we have no documentation whatsoever. Basically, they lied out their teeth, but that's as far as it went. And then through this document that happened to be saved, which was it was never meant to be publicly released. It came out to researchers in about April, I think, 1983, but it didn't surface in the world, as it were, publicly until October of 1983, almost 3 years after the event, when in the UK there was a big tabloid newspaper, front page splash, UFO lands in Suffolk, and it's official. And they got a copy of the Halt memorandum, and this is where it publicly became known for the first time, which to all intents and purposes back in 1980 then become viral the way we think of viral now. It spread quickly amongst newspapers, went around the world, and that's how the Rendlesham case really became an international well-known story. But there are so many things to this case that most people aren't aware of.
What's the most surprising thing that you learned? What?
One of the best things. Well, two incredible things. For many years, there were rumors that a UFO had shone a beam down into the RAF Bentwaters nuclear storage bunkers, the weapon storage area that housed tactical nuclear weapons. Now, we never had a name. It was rumors. In fact, I'd spoken to Colonel Halt, and Colonel Halt had told me in a little video that I'd recorded with him in 2007 when I first met him, he'd actually confirmed that someone in the weapon storage area tower had contacted him and told him that a beam had gone down into the nuclear bunkers, and that personnel on the ground, security personnel on the ground, had also witnessed it too.
Now, I've always maintained that there was another witness.
Yes, there definitely was another witness. Actually, there were many witnesses. The tower operator, I've been in contact with him recently. He initiated, actually. And okay, we'll come down in just a minute. Sorry. And he has told me in no uncertain terms he saw the beams of light coming down in the weapons storage area, and the crew on the ground, the security personnel on the ground, did see the beams too.
He then subsequently denied that he'd said that to me, which is bizarre. But when we talk about a rumor, it's good to have a name. Well, one of the people that I interviewed that came forward during my investigation was an airman called Steve Longero, and he had arrived at the base in early December, and he had just been put on shift, and he has confirmed that he was walking around with an experienced airman inside the RAF Bentwaters weapons storage area when he saw a UFO, when they saw a UFO, that then shone a beam down into the nuclear weapons storage bunkers.
It was like a thick beam that was scanning the whole WSA, like he was looking for something.
And then proceeded to do what you can only describe, as he described, as a scan. And it went down the entire length, 200-300 meters of the bunkers, like doing a scan search of what is underground. What are you got under there? And I think the relevance of that is Colonel Halt had told me on a couple of occasions that there were more nuclear weapons held underground at RAF Bentwaters than anywhere else in Europe. Now, it was a nuclear base, but it was the amount of ordnance. And it speculates that far more of a stockpile of nuclear weapons was hidden illegally. Hence why nobody will ever admit this, because it would be an international break all the armament agreement. So it's obviously a sensitive subject. But that's what he told me on a couple of occasions. One of the times was witnessed by my second wife, so she could verbalize that and express that herself. But the relevance of all of this is what a lot of people don't realize with the Rendlesham is, why do UFOs turn up in late December 1980? And I think one of the key things is that in late December 1980 was the world situation. The rise of the Polish shipyard workers under Lech Wałęsa in Gdansk, Poland. There was a revolution threatening to take part. They wanted democracy. But of course, Poland then was still a part of the Soviet Union. So at the time of the late December 1980 events, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were massing on the Polish borders, and it looked like they were going to win and quell the rebellion, like they had done previously in Hungary and Czechoslovakia, historically wise. And the other thing that was a powder keg also taking part at the time was 52 American hostages held in Iran. The hostage crisis. So you had the powder keg of the Middle East, you had the Soviet Union threatening to destabilize another country. And so I think it was a very dangerous time, potential Third World War scenario. And I think UFOs turn up en masse because they know, and I can't prove this, but they know that there are a stockpile of nuclear weapons that shouldn't be there at time of this nuclear crisis, of this potential Third World War crisis. So that's my personal take as to why they turn up. But there are so many fascinating details. You
think it's basically because of nuclear weapons, they're interested in the nuclear weapons here at Bentwaters. But
yes, I think there's a strong correlation historically, as you will know from your own UFO research, that there's a long history in correlation to UFOs being seen near nuclear facilities, whether it be, aircraft carriers, nuclear power plants, etc., going back to the 1940s. So I think it's no coincidence that they turn up at a time of world crisis and kind of like scan the contents and think, that's not quite right. Now, I can't prove that, but, there is this correlation, and I think it kind of makes a logical reason why they turn up and are interested.
But basically, I talked to Nick Pope over a year ago now, and they had a case interested in this. Do you know Nick Pope? I guess he's also spoken a lot about this. What's your take on this?
Nick Pope is. When I said at the start that the case is complicated, it is, and part of it's complicated because 3 of the original witnesses have become principal researchers, namely Colonel Halt, Jim Penniston, and John Burroughs, which is unusual. And they, in a sense, have controlled the way that the narrative of the case has been portrayed in TV documentaries, of which there's been about 50 or 60 English-speaking documentaries made by film crews all around the world over the last 40 years. And one other person is involved in controlling that narrative, and I believe that's Nick Pope, who has a long association with the case, going right to when he first surfaces in 1996, when he goes public with his, he goes on BBC and says, yeah, some UFOs are definitely extraterrestrial. He's never really said it since, but he did so then, and I think he did so then to to be accepted by the UFO community. He then becomes embedded within the US circuit, becomes very prominent as the go-to guy for all documentaries, and he has a unique position in which he can shape the way the TV documentaries are made, what people are going to be involved in the cases, because. And I don't know if you're aware of this, Chris, is that I've done lots of documentaries, and the vast majority of documentaries are put together. They get a budget, they put in what it's going to be about, they get a budget, and then they get researchers to start filling in the pieces. Well, when it comes to UFOs, because it's not mainstream, basically researchers don't have a clue. So they ring up somebody like Nick Pope and say, well, okay, you're the go-to guy. Who do you want to be on the show? And he'll go, well, I think you should have Colonel Halt. I think you should have John Burroughs and blah, blah, blah. So they shape it. If it was anything else, they would know about it. But because UFOs is a fringe subject for all these years, and it's happened to me, they've asked me, what do you think? You can shape it, and they have shaped it. And I think the reason why they've shaped it is because when the Halt Memorandum came out, it featured 2 nights of UFO activity. The first night of generally accepted UFO activity at Bentwaters and Woodbridge was what was called the first night landing, involving Sergeant Jim Penniston and Airman John Burroughs. And basically, Jim Penniston and John Burroughs, cutting a long story short, they go off into the forest following strange lights, having got permission to go and search in the forest because it's British soil. And eventually they come to a small clearing. They come across, what Jim Penniston describes as a 3 meter by 3 meter triangular craft sat at or near the ground. It's either hovering 2 or 3 feet or it's on legs. Now, he sees it as a black, small triangular craft, 3 meters by 3 meters and 2 meters high at the central point. It feels like glass. It's warm to the touch. It has some lights emitting from within, but there's no kind of propulsion system. There's no kind of rivets or anywhere. And at one point, he says he finds symbols on them. Now, strangely, or not so strangely, John Burroughs, who was with him, was perhaps 20, 30 meters away. And he didn't see a black triangular craft, but he sees a bank of lights that suggested that there was structure behind it, which can be, you can accept that because his geographical position is different, his perspective is different, and especially if the lights are bright, he wouldn't be able to see the superstructure behind. But the key person is Sergeant Jim Penniston. Well, he drew it, he walked around it, he touched it, took photographs. The photographs later came out fogged, or that's what he was told from the base photo lab. But that is what was accepted as the first. Now, in that Halt Memorandum, the first paragraph, there are only 3 paragraphs that Colonel Halt wrote, or Lieutenant Colonel Halt at the time wrote, which was 3 paragraphs. And the first paragraph, it says that there was a first night landing, on the 25th into the 26th of December. And then 2 nights later, we refer to what's called the Halt night, which is this incident which is described as the 27th into the 28th. And this is where he admits. Now, the key to the Halt memorandum is the fact that it admitted, years after the US Air Force and government denying anything, that there had been 2 nights of UFO activity. And that was in April when it came out to researchers in 1983. So it confirmed that there'd been 2 nights of UFO activity. Now, interestingly, you'd think that on the strength of that memo, the Ministry of Defence, especially where it mentions a landed triangular craft, how they could then determine, as they did, that there was nothing of descent significance is beyond me, and clearly shows that the Ministry of Defence and subsequently questions asked in Parliament, all of which denied by subsequent governments, is that they wanted to keep it under wraps. They wanted to play it down because something so close to what was Britain's top strike base in the event of a Third World War scenario, of the Soviet Union coming down from the likes of Denmark, etc. They were the front strike base. You know, this is a fighter pilot. They were there to stop that Soviet aggression. And so for them to have a landed craft within, you know, a mile or so of the perimeter of that top strike base and say there's nothing of descent significance, not that they would ever, nobody's ever to this day acknowledged that the memorandum quoted an accurate craft description. Nobody will ever talk about it, even to this day. So to me, it's all part of a cover-up to downplay, and hence why the title of the book, Non-Human. And I call it non-human. You asked me earlier. I call it non-human because the 17 incidents that are all listed there in chronological order as best you can, nobody's ever come up with a timeline like this and broke it down. Those 17 incidents, not one of them can be explained by any terrestrial aircraft. Simple explanation. They're all anomalous objects seen. Sometimes they're triangular craft, sometimes they're balls of light, sometimes they're fiery balls of red glowing object the size of a beach ball. I mean, let me give you I know time's running on, but there's so much to this book, you can't really do it justice in an hour. But I want to give you one big take that came out as the result of the reinvestigation. A story that was covered up for 42 years by the US and British governments, right? Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin was a shift commander. There was an incident that reported a female security police officer at the East Gate at Woodbridge said she'd seen an object dropping into the forest. This is now what's regarded as the second night of consecutive, which is the 26th of December into the 27th. And she reported it. It went out over the air. Can anybody respond? There's obviously mobile patrols. And the first person to respond was the shift commander, Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin. She happened to be just driving on a public rural road from RAF Bentwaters, making her way to RAF Woodbridge by private British road, public road, approximately 3.5 miles or 2.5 miles, something like that. And basically, what happened was we knew something had happened to her because people had gone on the record and said she'd gone screaming over the radio, help, 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 Bobby, Bobby, help, help, help. And she was screaming and she was obviously clearly traumatized. For many, many years, we didn't know what had happened to her. Well, now we do, because I talked to an airman called Michael Stacey Smith, who'd been there at the time. He was told urgently to open up the back gate of RAF Bentwaters, which is called the Butley Gate. He did so, and then within seconds of him opening up the gate, 3 or 4 vehicles, US security police vehicles, left in a convoy at speed. He didn't know what was going on. Then a few minutes later, he sees Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin as a front seat passenger being driven back into the base. The driver was Sergeant Robert Ball, who's never really gone on the record properly. He's never been questioned at length. If you're still out there, Robert, please contact me, because you've got a big part of the story still to tell if we can retrieve it. And basically, he sees that Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin is not wearing a beret. She is disheveled. She is quivering. She is shaking. Clearly looks like she's been roughed up. And then a few minutes later, he sees a vehicle that sustained rooftop damage akin to having rolled a vehicle as it's rolled onto its side and creates some crumple to the roof, but it's still drivable. That then comes in. He's thinking, what the hell's going on? So he speaks with the sergeant in the control room that he was aware of that night. And the sergeant, who is good friend, said, look, I'll tell you what happened to her if you don't ever reveal my name to anybody. He made that promise. He didn't reveal it to me, but I have no reason to think that he's going to lie. And basically the sergeant said that she was on the public road when a beach ball size object, a red beach ball size object, began to travel parallel with her to edge row height, following along the lonely country road. She then became so scared, as you would, that she lost control of the vehicle and ended up rolling into a ditch. The vehicle turns onto its side. She clambers out, and the beach ball size object is just hovering above her. It's like waiting for her to get out of the vehicle. She gets out. She then picks up her weapon. There's some debate whether it's an M16 or a sidearm, a pistol, but discharges several rounds at it, which then makes the UFO or the object go away at speed. She then goes over the radio, help, 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 which then corroborates the story that we did know for many years. Help, help, help. And the first person that gets to her is Sergeant Robert Ball. That then corroborates what Michael Stacey Smith is saying as a first person witness of seeing her being driven back by Sergeant Ball. The vehicles had sustained damage, so that corroborates that part of the story. And that was all hidden. The sergeant said all the bullets, she left a weapon at the scene. This is how distraught she was. Now, you know, from being in the military, you just don't do that.
No.
Serious rules about discharging a weapon. There are real serious consequences for a negligent discharge of a weapon. So though she'd fired several rounds, not sure how many, but all the rounds were put back in the armory as if nothing had happened. A weapon was collected, put back, cleaned, put back in the armory, and that was all covered up for 42 years. Now, that should be a front page story. It should be on the news at 6 o'clock news, as far as I'm concerned. And that shows you the level of cover up that there has been. And we didn't know that until I'd done the deep dive into the book.
Is 42 years of denial. You mentioned 17
different
cases,
timed
17
events,
actual events that were related. So what I got from speaking with you, basically, Gary, thanks again for your time, is that Rendlesham Forest is a much larger case than at least I assumed. You know, Peniston, I've heard that before. You know, the story, he touches the craft, he gets the binary code, but basically everything that Nick Pope.
There is a chapter on Nick Pope. There is a chapter on Jim Peniston. I touch on the binary codes. It's a standalone account. There's nobody that corroborates it, and it's like I wake up and say I'm Jesus reborn. It doesn't mean anything. There's no corroboration, and you're not just going to accept all the data that you're going to be given. I've suggested that he should do a lie detector test. That would help him if he could pass that. The only person that's ever done it and passed with flying colours was the original military whistleblower, Larry Warren, who was involved in this second night landing with Sergeant Adrian Bustinza. All the others are not interested. They don't want to do it. There's a lot of politics involved.
And you were a retired police detective, right? You mentioned in '83. Is that when you?
I was in the Royal Air Force as a police officer. In simple terms, I was a corporal in the Royal Air Force Police, not a high rank. But for 3 of my 6 years in the RAF, between 1983 and 1989, I worked on 2 nuclear weapon storage areas, which in the RAF are called supplementary storage areas, SSAs, not WSAs, as in the Americans' weapon storage area. So I was very familiar with guarding nuclear weapons, and obviously was one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved in this case, because I suspected there were many more witnesses, especially within the weapon storage area. And hence now we've got that named witness, Steve Longero, who for the first time has corroborated that a beam went down into the Bentwater storage area. So then I left after 6 years to join the British Transport Police in 1989. I then went on to have a 24-year career with the Transport Police. I retired early to launch my own UFO magazine, a PDF bi-monthly magazine that launched in 2013, so a natural extension. And basically for the last 19 years of my police service, I was a detective constable, not a high rank. I didn't want to go high because you get then stuck behind a desk. I like to be meeting people, and my bag was interviewing. So I became an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses. And unfortunately, when you talk about UFO research, it's the blind leading the blind. People are not trained. Whilst there are one or two courses around, the vast majority are just willing people wanting and fascinated by the subject, but there is not enough training. There's not enough money within the organizations to do proper training. But yeah, I would say I was a trained investigator. Certainly when we look at Nick Pope's role, he had overplayed his role. When he was at the MOD, and I've subsequently seen in documentaries, he said he ran the UFO department. He ran nothing. He was only 24 years old when he worked at the MOD. He worked at the MOD UFO desk. It was a one-person desk, his own. He admitted in letters written during the time he was there that he only was paid for 20% of his work was UFO related. So on an average 40 hours, he did 8 hours a week. And that then becomes the go-to guy in the world. Not quite. He was not a trained investigator. He made a few phone calls here and there. He was basically handling correspondence of public that were reporting sightings. But the vast majority, hundreds out of the 900 that he alleges that he received during his 3 years at the desk, mostly were poorly routinely filled in forms that had no follow-up. So they were just either a letter, thank you very much, blah, blah, blah. The MOD don't believe there's been anything of distinct significance. That was the standard line. And basically, his role is very interesting. It's a very interesting chapter where I think he was planted within the UFO community to shape the narrative.
Okay.
Hence why the book is controversial, but it's told evidentially. There was no pre-publicity to the book whatsoever. Who does that when you're releasing a book? And that was done deliberately because I wanted to get the information out. If you think about the 3 videos that are out now, the Tic Tac, Gimbal, Go Fast, they were released to get it out there, because once the genie's out of the bottle, it's there and people can see it. And that's the approach that I took with the book, is to get the information out there.
Why this design? What is this? How does this relate to the story?
Because what a lot of people believe now is that there are portals around the earth. I never used to believe this. It would seem nonsense to me, but I do believe that there are some strange areas. And one of the areas that I think, and from having done a lot of filming in the forest and during the making of the documentary, there were some strange things that happened. I do believe that the Rendlesham Forest is a strange place. And even to this day, there are strange things happening. You know, power outages, recent sightings, strange creatures seen, even now. So I kind of think the spiral represents something that's strange, something that shouldn't be there, but it is.
Okay. Well, excellent. Thanks so much for your time, Gary. And I mean, the book, it sounds awesome. I will definitely read it. So I have a copy. Thank you for that. And for everyone watching this, please check out Gary's book. It sounds like there's a ton of new evidence in there, new witness testimony, and they do memory regression, all cool things, added extra nights. Yeah.
And Chris, I just want to point out that the foreword is written by Don Smith, who's the world's leading expert on Roswell. A lot of people think that Rendlesham is the second most famous case in history after Roswell. So there is that kind of nice anecdote to Roswell. And he was very gushing with his praise for the book, which was very humbling for me. 500 pages, and it's based on the actual evidence. And nowhere will you see as thorough look at the evidence as what you will do there.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thanks for your time, Gary. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. Amazing interview. I just went back and editing it. There's so much packed in there. I mean, the additional night of events, the corroborating testimony that it was all filmed and sent to DC, that red orb event, and the cover-up, the control of the narrative. Exciting stuff. Please like and subscribe. Share the video, and then get additional content at patreon.com/Chris Lehto or YouTube members. Have a great day. Peace.